CareGiver Reality Hour. You can hear us at 1470 AM here in South Florida. You can hear us on iHeartRadio. You can watch us live stream at AMP2 TV or www.caregiverreality.com. And this show is for you, the 60 million caregivers here in the United States who do for others what they can no longer do for themselves. And included in that group is myself and my co-host, who's not here today, Dr. David Levy. In Dr. Levy's place today, though, however, we're very fortunate and blessed to have Allison Negri. She's a good friend of ours. We've known her for a long time. She and her husband, Tino, they operate Comfort Care Home Care Agency here in Palm Beach County, and we're going to talk a little bit about a project that she's involved with and talk a little bit about some of the things that she is finding along the way. How are you this evening?
I'm good, Paul. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to being here.
It's going to be a very, very good time for you.
I'm sure.
I went up to Philadelphia for some meetings, Allison, and we had a very productive meeting, 10 degrees. When I came down there, and I came home, and the airplane must have been a breeding ground. I came off the jetway and just about made it past without collapsing, and I had like 102 temperature when I got home. And it was 10 days of the sickest that I've been since I was probably a kid.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're feeling better.
I'm feeling great. Now, if you call my other half, who is not feeling so well. And what David and I typically do at this time is we ask each other about how our caregiving has gone for the week. And David will be on the line shortly, and we'll talk about his caregiving as well as himself. I share often about my wife, Debbie. Debbie is and has been coming along, struggling with her lupus and some of the ensuing effects. But being the wonderful husband that I am, I decided I should give her the gift that keeps on giving. And this week, she is down with what I had last week.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so we're going to try to see what we can do not to pass it back and forth to one another. But it's really hard when you're in the same household.
Absolutely.
And I was told I am not a good patient.
As I said earlier, are any men. That's why they have wives.
Yeah, it must be in the genes for sure. It must be in the genes for sure. Allison, you are involved in a project, and why don't you tell us a little bit about the project? It's called the Dementia Wise Workshop. Until we have David call in, and we'll take a break at that point.
Absolutely. So we have created a program. It's a workshop. It's not a support group. It is a workshop. It's a 5-week workshop. So family caregivers are committed to coming for 5 weeks. My husband, Tino, who is a national certified Alzheimer's educator, myself and our other partner, Scott, who's also my dad, is as well. So Tino is facilitating it. He is supported by myself, David Levy, who we're happy to have as part of it, and Scott, who's our business partner in Comfort Care. What we are trying to do, and most importantly, as much as it's facilitated by us and supported by us, it's really the involvement of the family caregiver. Mm-hmm. So we want to talk about, everybody understands that dementia is a memory disorder.
Yes.
It's much more than that. It's a language disorder. There are many other things that people with dementia lose as the disease progresses, and there are a lot of things that are retained, emotions, behaviors, but how do you deal with that? So what we want to do is take all of the lost functions, all of the functions retained, and figure out what applies to each caregiver, what's going on in their specific circumstance, how do they manage it, how do they deal with it, and how can they make it better? How can they improve the quality of life?
Quite a tall order.
It is a tall order. And then on top of that, we've added a self-care perspective because, as we know, 64% of family caregivers who are caring for somebody with dementia and don't get outside help will predecease their loved one. So really taking care of yourself is as important. So how do we do that?
Part of the workshop.
Exactly, all part of the workshop.
I understand we have on the line Dr. David Levy, who's going to join us. David, are you there?
I'm here, Paul.
And how are you feeling, and how is your bride feeling?
Well, this week was the last 2 days have been role reversal. I've been the patient, and she's done her best to be the spousal caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
She's done a wonderful job, but due to an electrical outage that we have neither microwave or oven. So, so we've been crock-potting it.
Wow. That would not be an issue in my parents' home. I'm not sure the microwave or oven have ever been used.
They make reservations.
Very well.
Yeah. And
But,
David, how are you feeling? I mentioned earlier when we began the show that you had some a surgical procedure done, and you were told to be a good boy and a weekend take it easy.
I was told to behave and to essentially for the next few days stay in bed because I have an infection that I didn't contract at the hospital. I came in with it, and part of the surgery was to clear that up. And so I'm on some powerful antibiotics, and they're doing a wonderful job of upsetting my stomach. But, you know, I have to be a big boy about it and follow directions. Actually, my doctor called me a couple hours ago, and he was getting ready to leave on vacation. And he called up and reminded me that I had to stay in bed because he just had this feeling that I wasn't going to be compliant.
I'm surprised he doesn't have a monitor attached to you.
Oh, gosh. But in any event, thank you for asking. And I must say, Paul,
Yes.
you look great tonight in a white shirt. You look, I don't think I've ever seen you in one, you know, without one of your shirts of many colors.
Well, it actually is green and white, David, but
Not showing up
it
on
sort of
screen.
gets lost a little bit in the color on that. And, you know, since I had to step into those big shoes at this side of the desk, I really had to dress the part.
Okay. Well, so far you're doing a wonderful job. I watched you on Caregiver Reality until I switched over to make this call. And Allison, thank you so much for being there tonight.
Thank you for having me, David. I'm sorry I missed you, but I'm wishing you a speedy recovery.
Well, David,
we'll see enough of each other in the course of doing the program.
I look forward to it.
You know, the caregiver program.
so David, tell us about your perspective.
Oh, well, let me tell you, it was an interesting weekend. I went in the hospital on Friday. They didn't let me out until Sunday late afternoon. But it wasn't so much about what I was in there for. First of all, I must tell you, I got excellent treatment. I was at Boca Regional Hospital, and I don't mind saying that facility is really, really state-of-the-art. And I was very, very pleased with the care I got and the attention that they gave me. But I think the interesting thing was because I didn't sleep all that much, even though I was supposed to. I had an opportunity at some crazy hours of the day and night because they constantly come in to check on you.
Right.
To talk with a number of nurses and aides, et cetera. And when they found out what I do, it was really strange. I mean, I led the conversation a little bit, but every one of the nurses that came in was dealing with their own personal caregiving situation outside of what they were doing clinically at the hospital. And each and every one, and I must have had this conversation 4, maybe 5 times, were just as perplexed about what to do and how to handle things. And one was telling me, you know, I just finished yelling at my mother on the phone, and I know she has dementia, and I said, stop. I said, understand something. Unhook yourself from the role of being a nurse and be a daughter. And stop and think about who trained you to do this. I said, you never got this in nursing school. And I said, and nobody expected you to, how to be a caregiver. And so I had all kinds of conversations with a range of folks that were involved, including one that had a special needs daughter. And it was fascinating. You know, I almost felt like a priest hearing confessionals. But they all knocked on the door and came in, can I speak to you? And, you know, I just once it got around a little bit. So it was fascinating from that perspective. And I guess, you know, part of my perspective is that even though the clinical profession does a wonderful job at what they were trained for, when it comes to family caregiving for themselves and their loved ones, they don't have any better handle on it. Yeah, they may have a little better idea of the disease or, some of the things that may have to happen with wound care and stuff like that. But believe me, they are just as conflicted with all of the other things that confuse and confound caregivers that do not have a clinical background.
Paul and I had that same conversation about 30 seconds before we walked in the room. You sort of lose professional perspective when it involves your family.
Yeah, you lose it all, and I know because there are times as a spousal caregiver that I lose it, I supposedly wrote the book, and I can tell everybody else, but it's very tough to tell yourself. And
that's why you have me, David.
Yes, I know, Paul. And quite frankly, Paul was the dutiful caregiver supporter for me while I was in the hospital. I couldn't let him come over to the house and clean or cook because I didn't have a stove, and he wasn't feeling very well. But I'm glad you're back in good condition. But I just think it was an interesting observation that here were these folks that are taking care of everybody, but when it comes time to do it at home, it's no different than the rest of us. And I said to them, don't be so hard on yourself. I said, it's not intuitive. And very few people that have gone through it pass it on in a way that we can really use it. You have to figure out for yourself kind of, what are the touchstones and what are the guideposts. And so that was an interesting perspective. I also, Paul, have to do a great shout out, even though they're a sponsor, for Pop's Pharmacy. Because Sunday when I came home, I had one prescription involving the antibiotics that had to be formulated. Mm-hmm. And so even though they were closed, I called Steve Chalker, who's the pharmacist at Pop's.
Yep.
And I said to him, I need this. He drove down from Wellington, put the script together for me along with two others that I needed, and delivered it to my house within an hour and a half.
Wow.
Now,
that's impressive.
That's service, all right? And I say that only because he's such a great guy, and Pops has a neighborhood pharmacy. Even though they're in Deerfield, they're right on 2nd Avenue south of City Hall, they will go virtually anywhere and do anything that helps to make a patient's life a little bit easier. And in this case, I was the patient, and there was nowhere late on Sunday to get a compounding pharmacy. Fortunately, I knew a very good one, and they really sprung into action. So I want to thank Steve again, and I know you have it in front of you, Paul, but they're just terrific folks, and later on you'll give out their phone number again. And
absolutely, David.
All right.
I'm going to send you back to bed.
You're going to send me back to bed?
I am.
All right. Well, Allison, thank you again. Paul, you're great. I'm going to switch over to watching you on CareGiverReality.com.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Wishing you a speedy recovery.
Yeah,
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, very good.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Allison, I think before we go any further, I think we'll take a commercial break at this time, and then we'll move on to hear more about the program workshop coming up.
Terrific.
Grab a pen, because you're going to be given some really important information and a phone number to call that will really help you.
Did you know that the law allows people to protect assets and qualify for Medicaid? Did you know that Medicaid can pay for home care, assisted living, and nursing home care at even the best facilities and with even the best of agencies? Hi, I'm Scott Solkoff, and I write the book on Florida elder law. My father and I have authored the leading textbook on Florida elder law, now in its 14th edition. I lecture, I train, I teach other lawyers and judges all about the law, and I can teach you too. I love teaching and advising my elderly clients and their families. Good elder law planning can save the family nest egg and result in a tremendous difference in quality of care. Board-certified elder law attorneys, I'm board-certified, are specialists in planning for incapacity, wills, and trusts, and protecting assets against the cost of long-term care. Come in and see me. I charge $250 for a 2-hour meeting, and I don't think I've ever had one person tell me it wasn't worth many times that amount. We don't do free meetings, which often are nothing more than a sales pitch from someone who really needs the business. Call me at 561-733-4242. I've been in business for over 20 years doing just this work, and am certified as a specialist by the Florida Bar. Set an appointment. That's 561-733-4242. Come see me in my Delray Beach office on Atlantic Avenue. You just have to call my office at 561-733-4242, and I'm Scott Solkoff. Let me help you protect your assets, qualify for Medicaid or VA benefits, have greater peace of mind knowing that it's been done, and a higher quality of life. So again, call me, Scott Solkoff, at 561-733-4242, and remember, call your parents, not just to tell them about Scott Solkoff, just to tell them that you love them and appreciate them. I'm going to call my parents now.
The hiring of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based on advertisements alone. You can call our office at 561-733-4242 to get more information about our qualifications and expertise. This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vattiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back. Welcome, everyone. Dr. David Levy is out today. This is Paul Vattiato with my co-host today, Allison Negri from CompaCare here in Palm Beaches. You're listening to us on 1470 AM. You're listening to us on iHeartRadio, or you're watching us at www.caregiverreality.com, AMP2 TV, or www.1470WNN.com. And we're glad that you're with us today. And before we took our break, we were just talking to Allison about an upcoming program called the Dementia Wise Workshop. And she was talking a little bit about what the program is and what it's about. Why don't you continue on that, Allison, and tell us a little bit why people should be attending?
Sure. So people should be attending. If you're a family caregiver, many people have heard this statistic, the scary statistic, that 64% of family caregivers who are caring for somebody with dementia and do not get outside help will predecease their loved one with the disease. That is frightening. It happened to a client of ours just 2 weeks ago. And, you know, we all know the statistic, but now we can say she's the statistic, and it's frightening. So if you're a family caregiver, you need to be able to understand what your issues are, that you may or may not be alone. Remember, everybody with dementia, it manifests differently in every person. So what you're going through with your loved one may or may not be what your friend is going through, whose spouse may have the same disease. And it's important to talk about it, to understand it, and to learn how to deal with it. Just because somebody has dementia doesn't mean life is over. You know, there are ways to improve the quality of life. There are ways to communicate with somebody with dementia, and you have to know how to do it and do it well, because as we know, emotions are contagious. So if I walk into a room and I'm smiling, it's really hard for you not to smile back at me. If you're frustrated, which many family caregivers are, we know that it's a frustrating task.
It is.
So if you walk into a room and you're frustrated, the person that you're caring for senses that, they're going to be frustrated. But how do you manage that? You know, you've asked them, you know, you want them to do something, they can't do it. You know, they're incontinent, you have to bathe them, you have to change them. This is not what you signed up for. So by coming to the workshop and understanding what you're going through and how to deal with it and how to care for yourself is really, really crucial. We're also providing respite. It is a 5-week program. It's 2 hours a day, every Tuesday for 5 weeks. So what we thought we might hear is, what am I going to do with my loved one for 2 hours every week? So we are providing free respite so people can bring their loved one. We are holding it in a memory care facility. So they will provide the respite for us.
Why don't you talk a little bit about where it is being held and when it is being held? When does it start?
So it starts April 7th, Tuesday, April 7th. It is from 2 to 4 p.m., and it's every Tuesday from 2 to 4 until May 5th. It's going to be held at Pacifica Senior Living. It's on Jog Road in Green Acres. So
Sure.
it's Central County, easy enough if you're coming from Boca or Jupiter. Certainly easy enough to get to. And if we have requests for either North County, South County, or even in Martin County, we will certainly host another one locally. There's certainly the need.
Okay. And for those of you that would like to attend, you can call to make a reservation at 561-630-1620. Repeating 561-630-1620. Reserve a seat. Bring your loved one with you. There will be respite care provided, and it's going to be a very interesting program, dementia-wise workshop. And who are some of your speakers?
So, well, as I said, Tino's the main facilitator. David Levy will be there to support him, and then Scott Greenberg, our business partner, Income for Care, also author of Oh My God, I'm Getting Older and So Is My Mom. And my dad, and myself as well. Scott, myself, and Tino are all national certified Alzheimer's educators.
And he has a book out by the same name, your dad.
He does. He does, yes. An award-winning book, so I'm very proud.
Yeah, he's a good friend and certainly takes good care of his patients that he
really
works
does.
with and the families that he cares for, as do you, Allison.
Thank you.
These workshops are just so important. They're not droll, they're educational, they're informative, but they're also interactive and they're fun. Part of it is that you learn from each other, conversations are light, and there are ways that we can get past through the day-to-day drudgery of that difficult kind of caregiving and find and learn some new tools from real experts who do this professionally, done it for a lot of years, and will be able to give a little bit of guidance.
Absolutely. And it's not rocket science. It's not, anything overly scientific. There's simple cues and tasks that just have to be done maybe a little bit differently than you're doing now, maybe just some tweaking of what you're doing, and it makes a world of difference.
Allison, what about those that are living outside of the Palm Beaches?
Well, so this Dementia Wise workshop was originally created by our corporate office. We're part of a national franchise, and there's 180 Comfort Care franchises around the country. Not all are Dementia Wise certified, but those that are Dementia Wise certified will be offering the workshop as well. So if you are outside of the Palm Beaches and you're interested in a workshop like this, you can contact me also at 561-630-1620, and I can certainly reach out to our corporate office and see if there's a workshop in your area.
Okay, and let's not worry about if there has been a diagnosis or there hasn't been a diagnosis. If a loved one is showing signs of being forgetful or you're concerned about some of the behaviors that you see, it certainly would be a good idea and get to learn from people who are really expert at what they're doing.
Absolutely, and the earlier the better.
Yes.
As we know, most people, once they get the diagnosis, unfortunately, it's not early stage anymore. So as soon as you see first signs, start to get the help. Oftentimes by the time it's diagnosed, it's a little bit not too late, but there's more that can be done the earlier it's caught.
And as David referenced earlier, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. We say that all the time.
And even those people that are clinicians who are nurses, doctors in the medical field, when it comes to dealing with your own loved one, the answers are not as simple as you might think they are. It's very easy to tell someone else. It's real hard to tell yourself.
100%.
You were giving an example earlier before we came in of a case that you just working just recently.
I did actually. On my way to the studio, I stopped to see a potential client, and it's a husband caring for his wife who has dementia. And she's fairly young, 85, so on the earlier side when it comes to dementia. She is pretty much bedbound at this point. It was diagnosed a few years ago. And with a live-in caregiver, he still wants to do everything himself. So we were sitting in his office in his home, and his hair was long. It was in a ponytail, a little scraggly. And he said, "This isn't me, but I haven't had time to go get a haircut." And I said, "But you need to, because in order to be an effective caregiver, you need to take care of yourself. And, I know, but, she's my wife and I need to take care of her. I need to make her breakfast. I said, and that's fine. The caregiver can support you in doing that, but you still need to take time. You need to go get a haircut. You need to go take a walk around the block. You need to go sit by the pool for an hour and read a book. You need to go see your own doctors, because all of these things are suffering because you're caring for your wife. And it's admirable that you want to do that, but it's okay to ask for help.
I went through that myself when my wife first became ill. My own needs were really put aside because I was still actively working at the time. And before I knew it, I was 3 years before I had gone for checkups, and I had one particular case with a problem with a sunspot on my arm that potentially was very serious. If you don't take care of yourself as a caregiver, you really can't help the one that you love.
And did you have an aha moment when you realized that you really need to take care of yourself to be an effective caregiver?
Yes. I was told by my very good coach and friend, Dr. David Levy, it is time that you move back a little bit. And that's one of the benefits, Allison, that we have, that David and I are a support group of two, and we sort of keep each other in check, which is why I sent him to bed today. He's a good friend, and certainly I have the utmost respect for him. And, he works very hard. He helps a lot of people, but there are times that you really do have to take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take a moment, if I may, Allison, before we move on to some other things, and talk about one of our newest sponsors, the Senior Citizens Bureau. These are really great people. They are not, with all due respect, your moms and dads AARP. They are there to provide services since 1998 for those of us who might have questions, or those of us who need help in taking care of someone else or in some of the issues that we have. They are advocates. They run by volunteers. They have trained experts on there. And what I did today was, they have an 800 hotline number. I called the number, and I got to speak to this wonderful, I'm going to say young man in California, and talk to him a little bit about what they do. And he was talking about some of the cases that they have with physical abuse, mental abuse, financial abuse, suspected. They don't know what to do. And they give you the advice that you need of how to proceed. If you have doubts, what you should do. And it matters not how major or minor it is. Give them a call, because they certainly are there to help, and they have been just a wonderful sponsor for us. You can reach them at 1-800-281-1088, 1-800-281-1088. We're very, very pleased to have them as a sponsor, and calling them today. I mentioned earlier, I don't like to recommend a restaurant until I've had the food there myself. I was so impressed with the quality of answers and the deep empathy that I felt when they took the time to answer the questions.
Which is wonderful. It is so stressful. The same potential client I met with earlier had some concerns about some family members, that all of a sudden were a little more involved than they were prior. And he kept calling himself a coward. Because he couldn't do anything about it. He was afraid to do anything about it. So we talked about some options.
They shared on the hotline that an estimated 2.1 million older Americans are victims of physical, psychological, and other forms of abuse and neglect. And for every case of elder abuse and neglect reported, it's estimated that there are 5 cases that are not reported. And as you know from your experience professionally, in many cases at the hands of a loved one or someone that is known to the family.
79% of elder fraud and abuse, they say, is perpetrated by a family member or friend.
So you have a case where you're not sure, you question, you're worried, give them a call. They'll give you some direction, and they'll give you a little bit of peace of mind along the way. Again, Senior Citizens Bureau, and you can reach them at 1-800-281-1088. Allison, if I can move on to some other topics.
Sure.
We spoke earlier that this is National Women's Month. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that's all about?
Well, I think it's important, women for a long time weren't as involved as they are now. So I think, people need to understand that women have major roles in society, as well as being the family caregiver. Typically the surviving spouse, if you walk into an assisted living facility, you typically see more women than men. So I think it's important that we recognize what women are doing and what the needs are.
And not just 1 month a year.
Correct.
Well, anyway, Allison, the current issue of AARP Bulletin came out with some interesting statistics I thought I would share with you and maybe get a reaction on.
Okay.
In the magazine, they quote regarding health care costs that 61% of female workers who are age 50 and above worry that they won't be able to afford medical costs in retirement.
Valid concern. Absolutely valid concern. So medical costs, there's insurance, some better than others. Many people don't really understand what the difference is and may not have all the information when choosing a plan as they get older. So that's one healthcare cost that people are unprepared for. Long-term care is another cost. Many people are fortunate enough to have long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance is growing in cost these days. Many policies are unaffordable.
But there are alternatives.
There are alternatives. There's life insurance with a long-term care rider that can be more affordable depending upon your situation. If you get it younger,
yes,
it is more affordable. My husband and I just bought our long-term care policies.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was really once we got into this business and we saw what goes on with our clients, we said this is a must-have. But long-term care is expensive. If the average is 40 hours a week of care, every week of the year, you're looking at close to $40,000. If you need round-the-clock care, it's starting today at about $80,000. It could be upwards of $160,000 depending upon how the round-the-clock care is
calculated. That's a big
calculated.
percentage of income, and that number is only growing, and there's so much uncertainty in that world. But women also, if they have children and choose to stay home to take care of those children, that's time away from the workplace. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, they're caregivers.
Correct.
And they take time off to do that as well. So, yes,
Right.
they are concerned.
The sandwich generation, they're dealing with their kids, they're dealing with their parents, and unfortunately, they're not caring for themselves, which could increase their own costs, adding to the fear.
No question. Regarding caregiving, the article states that 67 of unpaid caregivers for a 50-plus family member are women. That's not really a surprise.
Not a surprise at all. I know my dad had some spinal surgery last year. My mom was his caregiver.
Yep.
I think he would have preferred a paid caregiver. But a few years ago, she had surgery, and the first thing he did was call a caregiver to come stay with her.
Well, yet ironically, David and I are both spousal caregivers, and, when we look at who's watching and listening to our show, it is skewing more male than female, because I think as women continue to rise in the workplace, as they should, many of the men are being asked to assume those responsibilities, as they should be.
And it's wonderful. I commend them for listening, for asking, for getting the information to be better caregivers, because I think a lot of them, this wasn't in their DNA. Mom always took care of kids. Mom always took care of parents. The woman in the house, if it's a brother and sister, it's typically the sister that is dealing with the caregiving, and the brother writes the check.
I will tell you a personal story. When my children were still toddlers, I was fortunate enough to be able to take a year off in sabbatical. And I had a family business at the time, so my wife went to take care of the family business, and I spent a year at home raising the two children, changing the diapers, and I got to tell you, it was one of the hardest jobs you would ever want to have.
You were looking forward to going back to work?
Going back to work was welcome. Anyway, it says regarding travel, 32% of 50-plus women who plan an international trip this year will visit a bucket list location. 24% are planning a family getaway. About time.
Absolutely. Much needed time to get away, decompress, go somewhere where your cell phone doesn't have service, or turn it off and spend time with your family.
Okay, scams. 65% of women have received a scam offer online. My gosh, who hasn't?
And that's not surprising either. I just hope, being that women are more educated, I hope they are, while they get the call, I hope they're turning them down.
And before you click on the icon or before you go to a website you're not familiar with, always check.
Absolutely.
Before.
You can tell in the URL if it's HTTPS, it's a secure website. Make sure it is if you're giving credit card information. Also remember, nobody's going to call you for your credit card information. You need to be calling them.
Nor will
to give
the
credit card
IRS
information.
ever call you on the phone.
Correct.
Okay.
They always send letters.
Speaking of which, tech savvy. 81% of older women who want to use a smartphone or tablet want help figuring it out.
That's not surprising. I think women are more inclined to ask for help.
Men never ask for directions.
They don't. They secretly use GPSs, but they won't ask.
Well, I don't think we like using them anymore. We don't like to be told by the voice on there of which way we should be going. But
well, you can now set it to be a male voice.
Even worse. On retirement, 44% of women 50 to 64 worry they won't have enough money in retirement.
Honestly, it's a concern of mine. I mean, I was raised to be very fiscally responsible. Thankfully, my husband was also. But I looked at my grandmother. My grandfather passed away almost 10 years before she did, and she was always very worried. And she was a saver. She was a frugal saver. But she worried. I think a lot of times the men manage the checkbooks, they manage the finances. The women don't have as clear a picture as to what's there. Also, if they're a surviving spouse, if there was a lot of medical costs involved, they may not really know what's left.
Yeah, and I when I was in private practice, Allison, I was just amazed at how many people did not have a budget. How many people did not know how much money was coming in, where it was going out. Mm-hmm. And as you get busy in life, those numbers are going to go higher and higher. The cost of care is only going to go one direction, and
exactly.
It's estimated as much as 40% of income will be directed towards health care costs as we get older. So a real concern. Options, 95% of women say it is important to be open and to be open to change no matter what your age.
That actually surprised me a little bit.
Tell me.
I feel like men are typically open to change more than women. I feel like women are more set in their ways.
Why is that?
I don't know if it's because they typically have been a little bit of the underdog in their professional world. They've been home, they have their routine. If they're raising kids, the kids have to get up, they have to be on the bus. They're home at a certain time to do homework and dinner and wait for the spouse to come home. That's changing, but our seniors relate back to that. So I think they're used to more of a routine, more structure, and the husband is used to adapting and changing to be able to provide.
So are you seeing, professionally, with what you do, more and more of the baby boomers now becoming the patient as opposed to them taking care of parents? Or is it still taking care of their parents?
There's still quite a few taking care of parents. Every now and then we get one or two that are the patient, but they're still the primary caregiver.
Okay. I mentioned I was in Philadelphia last week, and I was at many meetings, one of them with Drexel University, and they run an incredible autism institute, and I was working with Philadelphia Mental Health Center, and the work that's going on in autism is just amazing, and that kind of caregiving is really a lifetime of caregiving, and sometimes is extraordinarily difficult.
Absolutely, especially because the person that's caring for somebody with autism, as they get older, they're going to need the care. So how are they going to be able to accept the care and provide for their child, child, niece, or nephew? it's a lot to manage.
And really, to clarify, it's really called they're on the spectrum of autism, because autism is not one disease, nor is if you've seen one case of autism, you've seen one case of autism. But some of the more severe cases, I mean, we're talking about young children with feeding tubes and asthma problems, over and above the struggles that they're having with autism. That is a big stressor for parents.
And is there as much help out there as there is? Dementia is common, Alzheimer's is common. Is there as much help for those dealing with the autism or the spectrum of autism?
Well, there is a lot of help that's out there, and that help is better sought as the children are younger. The younger they're diagnosed, the younger they receive treatment, typically the better the results are going to be. And young children now, I believe it's under 3, are automatically covered under Medicaid, no matter what the income levels are. So
that's interesting.
that includes the evaluation. So it's something that everyone should know about, be it a parent, a grandparent, that if there are developmental questions, speak to your physician. And always you can call and get answers from many, many institutions, Drexel being one, and certainly Florida Comprehensive Center for Autism here in Hillsborough. Great place to call, easy people to talk to.
That's terrific. It's great to have that resource.
Moving around a little bit, if I may, Allison, we're fortunate to have you here today. There seems to be a lot of confusion between, and I know you have a home health care agency, between that agency and a registry. And this keeps coming back and forth many, many times, and they're used interchangeably, but they're not, are they?
They're not the same. So many people understand that, the primary differences are when a caregiver works for a home health agency, they're licensed, they're bonded, they're insured. The agency covers the employment taxes. The agency pays the professional liability and the workers' comp. And when they're with a registry, they're a 1099 independent contractor. So while they are licensed by the state, they're typically not bonded, not insured, not covered by workers' comp. And at least in Florida, homeowners insurance does not cover workers' comp. They're responsible for their own taxes. But it goes beyond that. It goes to oversight. It goes to training. So
oversight.
Nursing oversight. So, for example, if you're caring for somebody with dementia and they have, they were very calm in the beginning and all of a sudden they're having outbursts, you're sort of on your own because you're a 1099 independent contractor with a registry. You're deemed an expert in your field. You're not allowed to have any nursing oversight or training. So when that caregiver works with an agency, they can call a director of nursing who can come out and oversee what's going on and see if maybe there's something else going on with the patient other than just the dementia progressing. They can attend trainings provided by the agency. We do caregiver training monthly on the practical side of Alzheimer's and dementia, so understanding what could agitate somebody with the disease, different cognitive stimulation activities and behavior modification techniques. That is all provided when you are dealing with an agency. That caregiver has the support system, whereas with the nurse registry, they are a 1099 independent contractor. So you're the employer, you're responsible for the oversight, you're responsible for insurances and taxes. When it comes to an agency, the agency is responsible for all.
Just from personal experiences, some of the worst cases of friends, or the nice lady from church, or I met this wonderful person on Craigslist, and this is your loved one that you're entrusting.
Exactly. So you want to make sure, now between an agency and a registry, everybody is level 2 background checked, at least in Florida. So that's not a differentiator. The private caregivers, my friend's grandmother had this wonderful woman. She passed away. I'm going to take her.
Yep.
You have no idea what her background is. You don't know what her criminal history is. But what's scary is that even with the level 2, the state says they're eligible to work or they're ineligible to work. Even if they're eligible, it doesn't mean they haven't been involved in certain situations.
So, such as?
If a caregiver has a DUI, they're eligible to work in a senior's home. If a caregiver has a petty theft charge, misdemeanor, they're eligible to work in a senior's home. It is despicable So
Wow.
we actually run social media checks. We run public record searches. If we determine that any of these things have happened, I'm sorry, they can't work for me. I'm not going to place somebody in somebody else's home that I wouldn't place in my own. So with an agency, you have that that coverage, that oversight. In addition, God forbid something happens, whether it be an auto accident. If a caregiver's in a car with a client and God forbid they hit a school bus, if that caregiver works for a nurse registry and God forbid a child is injured, they're coming after the caregiver, the family. If that same incident happened and the caregiver works for an agency, they're coming after the agency, and the agency has the supplemental insurance. Caregiver client is primary, but we are secondary. So you're much more protected when you're working with an agency.
And I would imagine just common sense tells you that if it's a long-distance caregiving situation, it becomes much more critical.
It does. You also have the interaction, the oversight. Many of our family members have an interaction with our nurse. And that's probably the case with most agencies, where you have that interaction where the nurse can share with you the home care plan, what they see on a regular basis with their reassessments with mom or dad. So there's that added comfort level when you're out of town. It's really hard. My grandmother lived in New York before she passed away, and my mom was down here. Her brother was in Connecticut. But it was worrisome. And I happened to be in New York on a business trip when my grandmother went into the critical care unit. And it was helpful that I was there to be able to give my mom the information. But if I wasn't, you certainly weren't getting an accurate account of events from my grandmother. I mean, that just wasn't happening. She wanted to drive again and she wanted to go home, and that was what she cared about.
Right.
Not what the doctor said and really getting better and letting my mom know the truth.
It's just so hard. And as David referenced earlier, you know, professionals among themselves, they have the same difficulties. And that's why you really want that layer of oversight. You want somebody who's going to be held accountable and watch what is going on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Being an out-of-town family caregiver is probably one of the toughest things that you can do.
Yeah,
you know,
it sure is.
Especially if you're not able. I mean, I have a couple of families where the kids rotate. Somebody's here every weekend. So there is constant oversight. And thankfully, in those cases, the siblings get along. But all too often they don't, or they can't be here every weekend or even every month. So they come down from 3, 4, 5, 6 months in between visits, and oh my God, what happened to mom? You know, this wasn't the mom that was here 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So
just to put it in a framework of dollars and cents, typically here in the state of Florida, how much does a certified nursing assistant does a family get charged for?
So in Florida, if you're with an agency, the average is typically $19 to $20 an hour. 4-hour minimums is the standard with an agency. With a registry, it could range from $14 to $17. There are some registries that are charging $18 and $19 as well. But typically, if it's on the lower spectrum, we know right off the bat it's a registry.
Yeah, and I think that's not a place where you really want to try to save a couple of dollars by putting a loved one in danger.
Right. If you think about it, if you're saving $2 an hour on the average case, it might be $2,000, $2,500 a year. You've probably wasted that in worse places than your loved one's care.
Good. Allison, before we wrap up, believe it or not, we're getting near that time already. Why don't you go over again the upcoming workshop, get the particulars out so that everyone who would like to attend knows exactly what's going on?
Absolutely. So starting April 7th for 5 weeks in a row on Tuesdays from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., we're going to be hosting a family caregiver workshop. It is interactive. The family caregiver is doing most of the work, although it is facilitated by my husband, Tino, supported by David Levy, Scott Greenberg, and myself. But again, family caregiver workshop. So understanding what the caregiver is going through, how to manage it, how to deal with it, what they can do to improve quality of life for their loved one, and how to take care of themselves. It's going to be held at Pacifica Senior Living on Jog Road between Montana and Lake Worth Road. Respite will be provided free of charge, so you can bring your loved one. And you can call me for reservations and to reserve the respite. My number is 561-630-1620.
Want to repeat that, please?
Sure, 561-630-1620.
And is there a website?
There is not a website for this particular event. We will be doing a follow-up event in June. That's a one-time event for family caregivers, and that will be found on DementiaWise.com. It should be up in the next few days.
Okay. And, you know, if you can't make the entire series, come to one, come to two, come to what you can. The more you attend, I think the more information you're going to get and the more you're going to want to attend others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Before we wrap up, let me ask you, Allison, is there any last thoughts you want to leave our listeners?
I do. So we find this with a lot of our families. When somebody is getting help, they think it's the beginning of the end of their independence. And it's precisely the opposite. Getting help is the beginning of the restoration of your independence. You're living a better quality of life. You're eating better. You're getting out more. You're getting to doctors. So it's okay to accept help. It'll be tough at first, but it'll get easier, and I promise you'll get to a point where you couldn't live without it.
Independence.
Independence is key, and getting help, a caregiver's not going to take that away. They're going to let you do everything that you can do, just a little bit more safely.
And I think if you think of a balance scale with independence, and on the other side of that balance scale, you put quality of life, that's where I think it becomes a little more clear and a little bit more palatable to be making that decision. We're
Absolutely.
not here to take something away from you. We're actually to give you a much better quality of life.
We're here to enhance it.
Yeah. And also sometimes for the children to say, I know you don't need it, but do it for me because I'm going crazy.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I want to know that
Yeah.
you're okay. I want to know someone's checking in on you on a daily or weekly basis.
Okay, just to finish up with some housekeeping, David mentioned at the beginning of the program, one of our beloved sponsors is Pop's Neighborhood Pharmacy. They are really good people. It's an old-fashioned compounding pharmacy, old-fashioned in the service, but very, very modern and up-to-date in what they do. They're located at 20 Northeast 2nd Avenue in Deerfield Beach. They'll transfer your prescriptions from wherever pharmacy they may be right now. They'll contact your doctor, and they accept most insurances. Because they are a smaller custom pharmacy, they're not open every day, every day on the weekend, but they are always available by phone, and they're open from 9 to 5, and Steve will come in, and if you need something on the weekend or after hours, he'll come in, as David said, even deliver it if they have to. They're great
Wonderful.
people. And I tell you, we had Steve on the show a couple of weeks ago, Allison. He is just so knowledgeable.
It's terrific to have a resource like that.
Scott Solkoff, he is my attorney. He has drawn the plans for my wife and I can't say enough about him. And lastly, I want to thank one of our other sponsors, and that is Arden Courts. And I know you're familiar with Arden
Absolutely.
Courts as well. Our good friend Marcia Teal with the ambulatory dementia unit that is at Arden Courts in Delray. They really are the gold standard. And Chris is the new executive director there. Stop by and visit them. I mean, if you have a loved one that this may be something that's viable in the future, talk to Marcia. Even if you're not planning to put someone into Arden Courts or any other place, she has so much information. They run so much educational program. She's an important resource for you.
Absolutely. We love Marcia.
Yeah, she's very good. Well, we have a good show.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
We thank you so very much for joining us today. And Allison, I hope you do come back.
Thank you. I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me.
Okay. We'll be back next week. Hopefully David will be up and running, and we'll be back in his chair, and I'll be in the other chair. You know, we say each week to our caregivers, I say at the end of the show, caregivers, take care of yourselves. It is so important. As a spousal caregiver, as someone who does this professionally, as someone who does this on a personal level, it is a huge responsibility, a responsibility that is done with love and honor and respect, and it's one that is probably one of the most important things that we'll ever do. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to do a good job.
Absolutely. It's a great point.
Yeah. Until next week, I guess we'll see you then. Have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you on our next edition of Caregiver Reality Hour. Thank you for joining us tonight. And Allison, thank you for being part of the program
Thank
tonight.
you, Paul. David, speedy recovery.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com, or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinion